But tonight we're going to be talking about impenetrable couples. When you're going through conflict, when you're going through strife in your relationship, how do you keep the bond together? Because so many relationships are impacted by divorce. And as you know, in the United States, where upwards of 50% of all of our marriages wind up in divorce. So even though that is the moment where we, in essence, depart from one another, many of us have departed from the relationship years prior to the legal divorce. And so what we want to talk about is how to reconnect by effectively resolving issues. Now, as I was preparing for today's session, someone sent me through Facebook a phenomenal letter that was written that was so powerful. I said, you know what, I'm going to start our session off by reading an excerpt. It's too long to read, but it's an excerpt of this particular letter. And it is an open letter to my husband on our 7th wedding anniversary. I'm just going to read a snippet, and then we'll get into our presentation. This is what it says. Babe, you know me well enough to know that I'm not good at putting on a front. As they say back in the day, faking the funk. I feel deeply, and my desire to be authentic and transparent in every area of my life means that those feelings, the one driven by my flesh as well as the Holy Spirit, often are on display in both the best and worst of times. I often feel compelled to share our story of my life and a story that you are very much a part of to the masses. Well, here's another one of those moments. The truth is, this hasn't been a good year for us. It's been a tough year for our marriage. We've been broken. So much misunderstanding and yes, much resentment. So waking up this morning on our 7th wedding anniversary, I thought, wow, this is different. My mind didn't go to flowers or dinner or any potential bedroom shenanigans. Today, for me, my thoughts are not on celebration, but more contemplation. Where are we? Where does God want us to be in this season of our lives? How do we navigate the millions of landmines in our union? How do we keep our daughter protected? And how do we keep her from all of the War of Roses moments that we have in our marriage? I'm almost done. I want to share a story with you. One day while I was with my daughter, taking her to school, she was whining and complaining about a mosquito bite on her finger. I tried to console her. I tried to tell her that that mosquito bite will itch a little bit, but it will eventually go away. But nothing was working. Then I realized something. I was trying to find a way to make her not feel the hurt. And she was looking at me like I was crazy. I wasn't going to make her not feel the pain, not even a little bit. So that's when, not even thinking, I said sometimes boo-boos have to hurt for a while before they heal. Talk about a light bulb moment for me. This thing hurts right now. It hurts. And the reason I'm even doing this in a public forum is because I refuse to just post happy anniversary pictures and date night recaps on Facebook and pretend like it doesn't exist. I have absolutely no desire to paint a pretty perfect picture for folks in order to keep up appearances. There are too many of other couples who are going through what we're going through, and they need our story, that it hurts before it heals. And as I read that earlier today, it impacted me in a great way because many of us within the church are faking the front. We use Facebook, social media, and we show up every single Sunday with these pretty smiles and these disguises and these false faces and these masks as if everything is just okay, but we're hurting inside. But that pain that we have is an indication that there is a possibility for a future healing. And sometimes, even when you're going through the healing process, it's a painful process.
Yeah, it makes me think about when you get burned. If anybody's ever been burned, especially if you've been burned very, very bad, like a 3rd-degree burn, you know, you get burned so bad that the burn goes past the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd layer of your skin so bad that it burns your nerves. So you no longer feel anything. So you be in a relationship, and no matter, you've been burned so bad, no matter what happens, you can't feel anything. Anything that he says, you don't feel it. Anything she says, you don't feel it. You just feel numb towards the person. That's how bad your burn is. And so people are quitting on their relationships because they're burned so bad they don't feel anything. So they're questioning whether or not they love their spouse. They're questioning whether or not they can make it. And it really is going to require for all of us that sit here that are saying to ourselves, okay, I've heard all the things that they've said for every session, and now I want to know how am I going to put all these pieces together to figure out how to make this thing work and move on to the next stage. And it's going to require a real mindset shift because we are conditioned in this society to divorce. You know the statistics in the church. You know the statistics in the world. You know 50% of it's not going to work. And so we already have like a parachute, like this escape route embedded in the back of our minds that when it doesn't work, it's just not going to work. And we've really got to get our mind around the idea that this is something that God has established. We are the footprint of His plan on earth, and that there is no backing out, that there is no parachute, there is no escape. It's a mindset shift.
And so we're going to talk about some of the challenges that people face in their relationships and how to overcome them. Just within this week, I've probably received countless phone calls from individuals who are going through pain in their marriages. I got a call at 8 o'clock at night, and the first thing I hear is, I had to call the police on my wife. I'm like, well, what happened? My wife's been drinking for 12 hours straight. And as a result of being intoxicated and not being able to properly cope with the pain of the affair that we just endured, what she did was she took a golf club and smashed all of my car windows out. She took a pair of scissors, ran into my closet, cut up all my clothes, punched me in the face 3 times till blood began to come out of my nose. And she went into the middle of the neighborhood and began to vent and complain about how no good I was, how much I didn't love her, how much I didn't love the kids. And because of the public embarrassment, I had to call the police on my wife. About an hour or so later, I get another call from a couple in a different part of the country. The wife is crying and pleading and screaming on the phone because she just got into a verbal altercation that became physical with her husband. This is now their 3rd marriage. The first wife of the husband committed suicide by taking her life and all 3 of their children because of the emotional abuse of that relationship. He gets into a 2nd marriage, short-lived. Gets into the 3rd marriage with now this couple who I'm working with. Now she's in and out of the hospital. This is an individual who's addicted to physically abusive and verbally abusive relationships. Somehow, he gets some type of pleasure from that experience of pain. So in the midst of their argument, when it becomes physical and things are thrown at him and punches are thrown at him, rather than a typical guy suppressing his wife and pushing her down to refuse for her to continue to beat him, he opens up his arms and receives it. So she picks up something very valuable and throws it at him. It drops to the floor. She realizes, wow, I didn't mean to throw this because this is one of my sacred objects. As she walks towards him and picks up the object and lifts up her head, she noticed that he's physically erect. That somehow he received some type of pleasure from the pain that he was experiencing in that very moment, which speaks to a deeper psychological issue. So whether we're talking about extreme situations or whether we're talking about the normal everyday situations, what happens is these types of incidents of pain create emotional detachment over the course of time, so much so that there's no relationship anymore. You just have 2 individuals living in the same home. So the question is, how can you continue to coexist when there is no relationship? I posted on Facebook just the other day that oftentimes when we get married, we give up our relationship for the sake of the marriage. Mm-hmm. The relationship obviously represents the emotional connection that you have with your partner. The marriage represents all of the duties, the responsibilities, the obligations, the family planning, the finances, the delegation of responsibilities. So one is more intimate and one is more structured and business oriented that carries the relationship through. But somehow when we say I do, the last thing on our list of priorities becomes the relationship. And so when you've been in a relationship for a year or 10 years or 20, and now your partner is at the bottom of your list, can you imagine why so many relationships are in conflict today? And so one of the things that we see is that an overwhelming number of couples are experiencing the pain of infidelity. And I want to stop right there, park there, and deal with that because this is a huge issue that's crippling our churches. And oftentimes when we're thinking about infidelity, sometimes we're so one-track minded in the sense of just thinking about the sexual component. But there are other components in mind that take place with an affair or with infidelity, and I want to share with you what those stages are to see if your relationship is in a vulnerable position because you have experienced it or are on the verge of experiencing it. So when you're dealing with infidelity, you have to understand that there are 4 classes of an affair, or 4 types of an affair. The first class, or the first type of an affair, is what we would call the one-night stand. So this is an individual that goes on a business trip or goes out of town on vacation or goes to Vegas, goes to Cancun, wherever it is, and there's nothing emotional, there's nothing relational. It is a one-time occurrence that is drenched in lust, sexual desire, and you're just there to be physically pleased. Sometimes you don't exchange names or just the first name. Sometimes you don't want to know anything about a person. They're just there to give you some form of physical, sexual stimulation, and you move about your business. Now, that is a crushing experience and blow that can take place in a marriage. But the way that you restore your marriage is very different than if you experience a different type of an affair. I will say, of all of the affairs that you could ever experience, that would probably be the easiest to bounce back from, though it is not easy. The second class of an affair is what we call emotional entanglement. Now, this is where many of us get caught up in. Because when dealing with emotional entanglement, you must understand that it doesn't mean that if there's an emotional affair that it always leads to sex. Sometimes it can lead to sex, but sometimes it doesn't. So if in our minds we're defining an affair or defining infidelity as a sexual experience, then many of us can be in inappropriate relationships, not realizing that it's causing a potential harm and damage to our relationship. But we'll get there in a second. But just in terms of the emotional affair, I often say that an affair doesn't begin in the bedroom, it ends in the bedroom. And what happens is, if you're in an emotional affair or you're experiencing what is called an emotional connection with someone outside of your marriage, let's just say you have a job and you're spending quality time with a coworker and you're able to share and talk about the weekend and talk about your interests and talk about politics, and then over the course of time, a relationship and rapport is developed, it can lead to an emotional affair.
Right, it's very sneaky because you'll find that you might be in a relationship with someone of the opposite sex. You may have been in relationship with them for years, but maybe it had not become a problem for your spouse until recent because of whatever reason. When you have an issue letting go of something or someone, regardless of how your spouse feels, that can be considered an emotional affair. You refuse to let go, you have an emotional attachment. There, whatever it is that you're identifying within that person, that he makes you feel good or she makes you feel good, or you can talk to that person in a way that you can't talk to your spouse. If you can't let that person go, regardless of what your spouse is saying or feeling, that's an emotional affair.
Now, a couple of weeks ago, we actually wrote an article that was published online, and it was dealing with the 17 telltale signs that you've entered into an inappropriate relationship which can ultimately lead to affairs. And one thing that we've discovered is that one of the biggest challenges that couples struggle with is this whole idea and concept of an opposite sex friend. Now, there are 2 schools of thought. One school of thought says, there's nothing wrong with having a friend. I mean, to be honest with you, I had, a friend before I even met you. We go all the way back to, middle school, elementary school, high school, and it's just a platonic relationship, and so I'm not giving up my friend just because we're in a committed relationship, right? And so that works for many couples. Then you have another school of thought that says there's no way on the planet Earth that I'm going to allow you to engage in a relationship, a rapport, communication with another person of the opposite sex, because this represents the primary relationship for the both of us. So if you're going to spend quality time with Jane, you might as well spend that quality time with me. Could you imagine? Here we are on the couch watching TV, and all of a sudden my phone rings, and I pick up the phone, and it's Clara, and I'm just talking to Clara about life and about whatever, and I'm like, all right, Danielle, I'm going to go out to the movies with Clara. We'll be back in a couple hours. Could you imagine that? That would be crazy. But what happens is, because there aren't walls, if you will, of protection in the relationship, many of us are entering into what we call inappropriate relationships with members of the opposite sex. Now, by definition alone, you have to understand what the word platonic means, because within the definition, it presents a problem. By definition, platonic means to have an intimate and affectionate relationship with a member of the opposite sex, void of sexuality. Now, I don't know how intimate you can be. I don't know how affectionate you can be with a member of the opposite sex without there being a temptation for something more to develop or to ensue in that type of dynamic. So the word itself is problematic.
And even if it's not a sexual attraction, because there are many people that have opposite sex friends where there isn't a sexual attraction, but there can still be betrayal. Because if you have issues with your spouse and you're going to that person all the time with your business, dragging your spouse's name in the street, telling him or her that they ain't no good, then that's betrayal, and that is infidelity. And so it's not necessarily always a sexual thing. It could just be you are using that person as a way to vent, to vent all the stuff that's going on in your relationship, and it just circumvents the process of healing.
And so there are a couple of indicators that I want to quickly read to you to give you an idea to check your own outside relationships to see if they're inappropriate. Number one, you wait to share your conversations with your friend. So in essence, we've been in a relationship for 12 years, going on 13 years. I mean, it's just like, what is there left to talk about? I mean, what?
Plenty.
And so I go to work, and now Hafiza is at work, and this is a new relationship, and there's 1,001 things to talk about. And so I almost short-circuit any type of interaction with my wife, because I already know what she's going to say before she says it. I already know her views. I already know her ideas. But now I have a sense of newness with this other individual, and I seek out those type of conversations that I no longer can have with my partner. And understand that the core of all communication is intimacy, right? So if intimacy means intimacy, I'm allowing someone else to see inside of me while I take the time to see inside someone else's mind, hearts, emotions, vulnerabilities. And so that causes the inappropriate type of relationship. Understand this in terms of other indicators. Number two, you discuss your relationship problems with your friend. That is the absolute worst thing that you can ever do. When you begin to share the difficulties that you have with your spouse, with a member of the opposite sex, what happens is that other individual begins to empathize.
Yes.
They begin to really understand your perspective, and they're there for you, and they begin to accommodate your feelings and your thoughts. And so when they're sharing their difficulties with you, what happens is all of a sudden, wow, we do have things in common. We're going through the same thing. And so all of these artificial intimacy type of connections begin to transpire between these platonic friends, and now they've developed a bond with each other that you no longer have with your own partner. Another indication, your friend discusses, no, I just said that, you start making comparisons between your partner and your friend. So if my partner is not the type to be open to the things that are interesting to me, but I find someone else who shares commonalities with me. Now I'm frustrated that my wife won't do what this friend will do, and so I naturally glean from this relationship because I'm getting more out of this person than I am from my own partner. So I'm making internal comparisons. Another major issue in terms of an inappropriate relationship with a member of the opposite sex is that you cut off all forms of communication that you're having with your friend from your partner. Now, this is where social media and the internet and phones come into play, because we've seen how technology has literally destroyed people's marriages. Simply opening up a Facebook account can potentially be harmful to your relationship. In fact, there was a study done of all of the divorces in the United States. And when certain divorce attorneys were interviewed, they said an overwhelming majority of a lot of the divorces that kind of were impacted by infidelity were because of Facebook, because of Twitter, because of social media. And so a lot of times what happens is we don't even acknowledge our partner in social media. And so I've had several couples that have come to me that are living completely separate lives on Facebook, and there's no indication that they're married, that they had children, because there's no evidence of it on Facebook.
No pictures, yeah. I've seen many pages where a spouse, they don't have any pictures of their children, any pictures of their spouse, all these opposite sex friends down the page commenting and conversing. And you know what? I've even had the experience of, past relationship people connecting to me on Facebook or whatever social media platform and not knowing. So that can cause conflict, because if you're not aware of the people that you're accepting, if you're just going down accepting, you can be accepting all kinds of past relationships that you shouldn't be connecting to.
Now, what happens when you're intentional in reconnecting? Because you know what? It's safe. It's on the internet, right? They live 1,000 miles away. And so it's okay to check up, see how, such and such is doing. And what happens is, statistically, it's been said that when two individuals who have a past relationship with one another connect on the internet, particularly Facebook, within 30 minutes, those emotions come back. Because your brain has an emotional memory, and it remembers the feelings, it remembers the intensity of the moments that you've shared, and so all of a sudden you're feeling a particular way from a casual, platonic conversation that went too far. And after 30 days of communication with this former partner or love interest from the past, it increases the probability of an affair taking place. So oftentimes, the social media platforms and the internet acts as an emotional attachment that can oftentimes become physical. Now, when you're experiencing an emotional connection with someone else other than your partner, that is probably one of the hardest types of affairs to bounce back from, because it's more than just refusing to no longer engage in physical interaction. It's more than just no longer, coming together and being in each other's presence. You're talking about a heart issue. So if you're still thinking about that person and dreaming about that person, and now your heart is perplexed because you have an attachment to your existing partner, an attachment to this other person, and your heart is confused, your thoughts are confused, your mind is confused, and all of a sudden you begin to show up less and less and less, not physically, but emotionally in your own relationship, because you didn't put up the proper boundaries and borders in that marriage. And so emotional entanglement is something very difficult to bounce back from, but it can happen. The third type of an affair that many individuals are impacted by is what we call sexual compulsion. That is when there is some intense sexual desire beyond my control, and I'm constantly thinking about sex and have to have sex, but not only sex 2, 3, 4 times a week, but every single day, twice a day, 3 times a day. And even though my partner is giving as much as she can give, her sexual desire is not as great as mine. So she no longer can satisfy me the way I need to be satisfied. So this lust and this desire drives me out of my marriage into the street to connect with anyone I can in order to get this lustful desire met. Sexual compulsion. The way that you restore a relationship in that manner is completely different than a one-night stand, than emotional entanglement, and even with the fourth type of affair. The fourth type of an affair is what we would call an open-ended relationship. An open-ended relationship simply means there are issues and challenges within your marriage that we've addressed on several occasions, and for whatever reason, it has not been resolved. And because you can no longer give me what it is that I'm looking for, I will either intentionally or unintentionally find someone else who will meet a need that you cannot.
I was just so into what you were saying. That's so real. I mean, thank God we never experienced anything like that, but there are many couples that we deal with that are so broken and so hurt and feel that there's nothing left in their relationship that they just walk out. They walk out and they go in search of the thing that they've neglected to receive in their own relationship.
And so when you've experienced these types of an affair, the question becomes, how do we begin to build back the trust? Because for many couples, listen, it's not just about the sex. It's about the emotional connection. It's about that we've lost this type of friendship. And what happens is, if we don't go through the proper healing process, we may never recover. Yes, we'll remain together. We could be married for 10, 20, 30 years, but many of us remain miserable in our marriage. There are so many individuals who are suffering in silence because they haven't reached the deeper levels of transparency and intimacy with their partner. Yes. So the hurt that I feel, I'm not comfortable opening up and sharing it with my partner, maybe because a wedge was developed many years ago and issues were never addressed, therefore never resolved. And so one of the biggest challenges, we're talking about the things that really impact marriages, the intimacy issues, one of them is the unwillingness to forgive.
Yes.
Forgiveness is so huge in marriage. And oftentimes, and I say this all the time, as believers, we're so focused on our vertical relationship with God. And we don't take enough time to focus on our horizontal relationship with our partners. Yeah. We'd rather forgive a stranger who we never have to see anymore, a co-worker for the sake of keeping our job, someone in a church or another organization that we belong to for the sake of appearing nice than we do our own partner. It is amazing how we have more compassion and more care for strangers than we do our partner who we wake up with every single day. I can't tell you all of the couples who literally are driving to church, kicking, screaming, fussing, cussing, and fighting, and as soon as they come out of the car door, it's praise the Lord, how you doing? And they're giving an image and an impression that is not real. Yes. When they get back into their car and go back home, he goes his way, she goes her way, and they play that same game week after week after week. In fact, I know many couples who are split, who live in separate homes, but will meet up about a mile or two away from church, get in the same car, drive together, just to give an impression and an image. And my question is, who are you doing it for?
Wow.
Is it to look good in front of the pastor? Is it to look good in front of all of the other parishioners? But the reality is, when no one else is looking, God is still looking. So you have more honor, more reverence, more respect for man than you do your own God, than you do your own spouse. Yes. And so as a result, what we do is this.
Yep. It makes me think about this book that I don't remember the author, but it just makes me think of something because I went through this, where this young lady, she wrote a book about how hurt she was by her mother, and she refused to forgive her. She was writing a book, and she was basically teaching everyone how to basically walk away from your parents. If they've offended you, like so many parents have led you astray or not, who have abandoned you or done things to hurt you, these are the steps to not forgive them and just walk away. And she ended up having a conversation with her mother where her mother actually acknowledged everything that had happened to this young lady. And in that moment, she talked about how all of her coldness, all of her stoned heart melted away, and she was instantly able to forgive, and that there was a huge weight lifted off her shoulders. And I think about a similar situation I went through with my father, where, I was daddy's little girl. And when my parents divorced, I felt like he divorced me. And he went on about his life, and he lived a full life, and he wasn't there for me. And so when I became an adult, I remember having my own children and looking into their faces and thinking, wow, I can never walk away from my children. And so I got into a conversation with my father where we had an altercation, and we tussled back and forth, and we fought about conversations and issues and things that happened as I was growing up and how he wasn't there for me. And, I wanted answers. I wanted him to give me, an example of what would be a good reason why you can actually turn your back on your children and walk away and never look back. And he was like, I'm your father. I don't have to answer these questions to you. You're my daughter. And I remember saying, I don't need a father. I'm grown. I have my own children now. I'm a mother now. So if we can't have this conversation, then there's no place for you in my life. And at that moment, there was a moment of silence. And at that moment, he gave the most heartfelt apology. Well, first it was an acknowledgement of everything that had been an issue in our relationship for the past, 25 years at the time. And instantly, all of the anger and frustration that I felt at that moment, all of that fighting and arguing that we were doing on that phone, when you just hot, everything is hot up in here, your heart is beating, you just are passionate about the conversation that's going on, you're on the verge of tears, this kind of an argument, and then instant melting of the fear or the anger and the frustration like ice. And although it is our responsibility to forgive, we have to forgive. Forgiveness is more so for ourselves than it is for our partner. But it is so much easier when the offender asks or asks for forgiveness, acknowledges their issue, apologizes. Because when they don't apologize, now they're leaving you with a bag of burden, a bag of problems. It's just like, I don't know if there's any fitness people in there, but your body gains weight as a result of trying to keep you healthy, actually. When you eat food, all those toxins come into your body, and your body says, okay, we got calcium, send that to the bones. And then it sorts out all the other stuff, and it says, okay, we got iron, send that to the blood. And then it sorts through all the other vitamins, and send a vitamin to the hair, and all this and all that. When it comes to toxins, it says, okay, we don't know what to do with this. Let's just store it. And it stores it as fat. And so now you're becoming bigger and bigger, and you're sicker and sicker. It's the same thing when somebody leaves you with their bag of burdens, when they've hurt you in your relationship, when they know they've offended you in your relationship, and they do not come to you and apologize. Because now you're forced to sort things. And you store the hurt, and you store the hurt, and you store the hurt because you don't know what else to do with it, because you haven't been able to break it down, because there's been no acknowledgement of it. So as much as we are responsible for forgiving those that have offended us, it is a major responsibility on the person that has offended or the person that has hurt their spouse to come to them with a heartfelt acknowledgement and apology for the things that they have done.
And that's so powerful, because whether you're dealing with infidelity or any other type of offense in the relationship, the offender quickly just wants to move on. Like, what? Listen, we experienced this 3 years ago. Why are we still talking about this? I'm getting frustrated because you've never acknowledged. I have acknowledged. I'm sorry, okay? Can we move forward? And so the hurt partner who's holding on to the issue, that person wants to move forward as well. But the only way to properly move forward with any issue that you've experienced is by going back. Because when you take a step back and begin to reflect and begin to analyze what has happened, in that analyzation, that's when the acknowledgement comes. Because the reality is, if you don't properly dissect what has happened, it is bound to occur again and again and again. And many of us have entered into what we call rerun relationships, where we're replaying the same scenario, the same behaviors, experiencing the same patterns, and getting the same results year after year after year, because we never took the time to properly dissect what has happened to come up with some type of solution. So what happens is, oftentimes we end issues, but we don't resolve the issue. And when you're ending an issue, what's really happening is it's lying dormant within you.
Yes.
And so eventually it'll come back to life, just like cancer, and will spread all over your particular relationship. Now, what's deep about this whole forgiveness thing is that all of us have been taught the power of forgiveness, but many of us struggle to really walk it through in our relationship. You know, there are great messages and scriptures that we can point to in the Bible, many stories of the power of forgiveness and what it can do to heal your relationship. But when it comes to the practicality of how do I actually do this, we struggle. And what we have found is that individuals who struggle with forgiveness in their marriage, there's a strong connection from the failure to forgive from their childhood. There's a direct correlation. I often ask couples, have you easily been forgiven? A lot of them say, well, actually, no. I'll say, well, what is the relationship that you had with forgiveness in your home growing up? Well, we never really forgave. We just kind of moved on and went about our business. So if you have a pattern of not forgiving or not properly addressing issues, and that's all you know, how can you expect to just automatically do something different and be someone different in your marriage? So many of us, even in this room, are holding on to pain of our past, and we're wondering, well, how do I heal from the past? By releasing it. But when you refuse to forgive, this is what you're actually doing. I wrote down a couple of things. Number one, you take on a victim-minded mentality when you refuse to forgive. Because if Danielle has hurt me 3 years ago and I refuse to let it go, what I've done is said, she's wrong for what she's done, I'm right. So therefore, the source of my pain is created by her. Now, I've become a victim to her. So now, in order for me to heal, she's got to do something. So in essence, I've given up my power to Danielle because I have a victim mentality, because I've made her completely responsible for my emotional reactions and my emotional health in this particular moment because I refuse to forgive. The next thing it does, it creates a very vindictive spirit. Because if I don't forgive you because of what you did to me, now I will enter into what is called a passive-aggressive type of relationship where I will intentionally do things that will hurt and harm you, but I will act as if I don't know anything about it, I had nothing to do with it, but it's causing more damage. Or if not in a passive-aggressive way, I will come out and unleash my pain in the form of fury, in the form of rage, in the form of physical violence, whatever it needs to be done in order to let you know that I'm never going to forget about what you did, and now you're going to experience the same level of pain that you've put me through. So now that's where emotional, verbal, physical, even sexual abuse takes place in a relationship, and it seems as though you're going in this cycle that you can never get out of, because even though for a couple of months things are going well, all of a sudden an emotional trigger takes place. Because now I'm sitting on my couch watching TV, and a video comes on, and it reminds me of the song that was playing at a situation in our marriage where she did something to hurt me, and so that trigger causes me to react violently towards my partner, whether verbal or physical, and so now here we are again in this same cycle. So a lot of times we think because the issue no longer is around us, and we're no longer experiencing it, that somehow it's gone away. But what we've done is we've dug up a hole, put it on the inside, but it's like being buried alive. It's not dead. And if it's not dead, it will resurrect.
And even if you have buried it, because there are people, we talked about this before, that are barriers and they kick everything under the rug and they won't deal with it until later. There are also others that are actually tormented by the memory of it. And so it's constantly playing in your mind. You can't, as soon as you lay down in the middle of the night to go to bed, you start rehearsing it in your mind. You catch yourself playing that memory over and over and over in your mind, how you were offended and what they said and how they said it and what they did and how they never forgave you and how you weren't acknowledged. And you start taking that as entertainment. You start playing it out. How your revenge would be, what you should have did in the situation. You just go into this whole drama in your mind and let that thing play out. And when you do that, your body physically believes that it is experiencing it again. So you might even notice your heart is beating again. You feel tense. You feel the same hurt, pain, and frustration that you felt at the moment that it happened, and you're just living in that. And so that's about getting your thoughts under control and submitting your heart and your mind to the Word of God and not letting those thoughts run rampant in your mind. I mean, you do, though most don't practice it, you do have the ability to completely control the thoughts that play in your mind. Most of you are not conscious of when these things start playing, and next thing you know, you all in the mind with it and letting these things play out in your mind over and over again, and you just imagine it like crazy. And you really need to take control over what's happening in your mind, because the mind is the devil's playground. And he wants you furious. He wants you angry. He wants you stuck. He wants you with no peace. And it's up to you to take those thoughts and shut them down. That's the way to overcome when you are being tormented by thoughts and memories of somebody who has hurt you.
So your obsessive thinking is impacting your emotions. And your emotions, which is a reminder of what took place in your past, brings you back into a past experience that you're now reliving in your present moment. So you're constantly living in your past within your present. And so if you're moving towards your past and your partner quickly wants to get towards the future, now you're in conflict. So you have to control your thoughts, because your thoughts control your emotions. So if you want to feel better, you have to think better. If you want to feel worse, continue to think those negative thoughts, because it will destroy your marriage just by the thoughts that you entertain. In fact, there's a client that I have that literally wrote down a list of the statements that reverberate in her mind every single day. It literally was around 25 thoughts that had become her own motto, if you will. And so as a result of that, she is unable to move forward in her relationship. And even though she acknowledges that she's seen a change in him, she acknowledges, yes, he's more caring, he's more sensitive, he's more attentive, but something about me can't get over what he used to do. You know, it's so interesting. In life, I say this all the time, in life, you're given a test and expected to learn the lesson. If you don't learn the lesson from that test, you're going to have to take that test again and again and again. And oftentimes, the tests that we experience in our lives and in our marriage represent the hardships, the pain, the problems. And because she hasn't learned, because she hasn't gotten over the pain, even though she's experiencing a new husband, she keeps referencing him as the old individual. Think about a person who's been in prison. They've been in prison for, say, 5-6 years. They're released. So they want to start a new life. And so the first thing they want to do is get a job. But when they go to their employer, they're reminded of what they just came out of. So opportunity is shut down because they're constantly being reminded, oh, well, you got out of jail. I can't offer you a job because therefore there's some level of trust. I can't trust you. You have a past. So in essence, it's like you're being victimized all over again. So now you're in jail outside the jail. And you're constantly walking around with prison bars in front of you everywhere you go because you're constantly being reminded by everyone around you about your past experiences. Likewise, in a relationship, when you haven't experienced true forgiveness and you keep reminding your partner about what he used to do, what she used to be, and don't embrace the new individual, you'll never be able to heal from that past situation. Now, even though many of us struggle with the refusal to forgive, some of us grab hold of forgiveness and run with it with dear life. And so we've entered into what I call cheap forgiveness. Well, what is cheap forgiveness? Cheap forgiveness is when you forgive too quickly. Now, what would be the problem of forgiving too quickly? Well, some of the challenges that come in with cheap forgiveness is this. Many of us forgive because we really have a fear of loss. We have a fear of abandonment. So if I forgive you quickly and don't address what has happened, you'll stay. You'll love me more. It won't affect our relationship. And because I cannot, be abandoned because I experienced abandonment in my home growing up, I will hold on to you for dear life regardless of what has happened. I will forgive. Another challenge that happens with that is this. It creates an emotional distance between you and your partner. Because even though you're quickly forgiving, because you're not addressing the issue, it was never resolved. And so, yes, we're physically close, but there's still an emotional disconnection because there are conversations that we won't have. Every time issues come up, we become emotionally distant. So, yes, we're in the marriage together, but it's just like we're on two totally different opposite planets within the same galaxy because we have experienced cheap forgiveness. Another issue when it comes to cheap forgiveness is that oftentimes there's a possibility that it can happen again because you've never effectively addressed the issue. So whatever it is, if you quickly forgive, there's no room for correction. So true forgiveness is a two-way street. It means that there's something that you must do as the one whose trust has been violated, and there's something that the individual who broke the trust or violated the relationship must do as well. And if you both are on the same path, going in the same direction, you can experience the proper healing in your relationship. But what happens when I no longer trust you? That's a big issue. We've been married for X amount of years, but I just don't trust him. When it comes to managing the finances or when it comes to taking care of the kids, I can't trust him enough to leave those responsibilities to him, so I'm just going to go and do it. Which now creates it's an imbalance in the relationship. And when you have an imbalance in the relationship, now one partner takes on more of the burden of the marriage than the other person. That creates further frustration and an emotional divide between the husband and the wife.
Yeah, I think that cheap forgiveness has a lot to do with just not trusting your spouse because many cases, there are many cases where if your spouse says, I'm sorry, you were right, I won't do it again. I know I said I wasn't going to do it again the last time, but this time, believe me. And you're trying to work things out, and you just, okay, I forgive you. You believe you're supposed to forgive. You're good, faithful Christian, and you're going to forgive because that's what you're supposed to do, and you don't want heaviness on your heart, so you're just going to forgive. But deep down inside, you know that joker isn't going to change. You know that they're going to do it again. You just are getting through the moment and forgiving. And that's a lack of trust because you don't trust that that person is actually capable of real transformation. So to keep the peace, to move on to the next thing, to avoid arguing, and some of us like to avoid altercation altogether. You don't like to deal with it, especially if you like throwing things up under the rug. To avoid any of that, you just forgive. And that's that cheap forgiveness. And I think that stimulates from just not trusting that the person is actually going to change or do what they said that they're going to do.
Absolutely. Now, with rebuilding trust, one of the key elements to do this is transparency. And a lot of times, even though we're in the same marriage physically, we're living two completely different lives. And we do not allow our partner to enter into the deepest levels of our soul and to understand who we truly are, so we block them out. Could you imagine having a conversation with someone on the phone and midstream throughout that conversation you hang up? Or someone comes knocking on your door, you open up the door and they're communicating with you, and halfway through you slam the door in front of them. Well, that's how many of us operate in our own marriages. We have closed ourselves out. We've closed our spirits. We've built up a wall of protection, not surrounding our marriage, but in between us as partners. And now there's an emotional disconnect because of this wedge that has been created because we won't allow our partners to come in. And so what we have found is that many men struggle with the issue of not communicating. So we shut down, we don't talk, we don't engage. And so as a result, I don't know what's on his mind. And it creates all types of frustrations because I really want to get to the heart of the issue, but I can't get through because he's not opening up and sharing. And so rather than talking with me, he'll talk to his friends, he'll talk to his female friend or his boys, but I'm not able to break through this huge thick wall. And so as a result, we're disconnected. And so that breeds mistrust. And as long as you have mistrust and emotional disconnection, that is what causes infidelity. That is what causes a divide. That is what causes inappropriate relationship and ultimately separation and divorce. So there are certain building blocks that we need to have in our relationship in order for it to work. And if we don't go back to the basics and deal with the fundamentals of things, we're going to continue to be struggling in our particular relationships. And so what we found is that when there is a lack of transparency, we're really dealing with the issue of secrets. Now, we dealt with secrets earlier in our marriage. And our relationship. Because we were in a relationship for about 1.5 years before we actually got married. And so sometimes, because we want to show the best version of ourselves to our partner, there are things that we do not share, there are things that we do not reveal that over the course of time creep up. Those bones do come out of the closet. And when they come out of the closet, in ways that we don't control, it crushes our relationship more than if we were to deliver them on a silver platter ourselves. And so whatever those issues are, it is important that you realize when you marry somebody, you're marrying their past, their present, and their future. When we say you're marrying their present, we mean you're marrying their thoughts, their true intentions, their true heart and desires that are kept away from you. And when you don't reach those deeper levels of intimacy and share those things with your partner, then how can you two walk together and be in agreement as the Bible suggests that we should do? You can't. And so these are the things, these emotional, intangible things are the things that are really destroying our relationships because we do not have a friendship because we've given up our relationship for the sake of our marriages. We're crippling our relationships because we have rings on our finger called a wedding band that represents our marriage. But what is the level of happiness in your marriage? So I'm going to ask you all 2 questions. And I don't want you to answer, but I want you to write the answer down on your piece of paper. As a matter of fact, don't even write it down because I see your partner looking over at your paper right now. So keep the answer in your heart. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the least, 10 being the most, what is your level of satisfaction and happiness within your marriage? On a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being the least, 10 being the most, What is your level of happiness and satisfaction within your marriage? Okay, question number 1. Question number 2, if it is not a 10, what's preventing it from being a 10? Meaning, what would have to happen to raise that score, wherever it is, to a 10? Whatever that is, then the question becomes, are you pointing the finger at your partner and making them the sum total and the one who's responsible for making your level of happiness what it needs to be, or are you looking within yourself? At the end of the day, most of us have failed to give 100% in our marriages. And we're sitting back and waiting for our partner to do something, and our partner is sitting back waiting for us to do something, and it becomes a waiting game.
Right, and we also actually don't really believe we're supposed to give 100%. We actually are trained to believe that we're supposed to both give 50%, and that 50% will equal the 100%. But no, we both have to give 100%.
Does that make sense? So when we're dealing with the challenges that impact the marriage, we talked about infidelity, okay? We talked about the unwillingness to forgive or cheat forgiveness. We talked about the inability to begin to trust again. And in order to develop the level of trust that you need, you have to have what? A two-way partnership where both people are fulfilling an obligation to begin to restore that trust. And trust is restored through consistency. When you're proving yourself to be faithful in particular areas, and over the course of time, those elements of trust or deposits of trust are built up in that relationship and is restored. When you begin to control your thoughts, which ultimately control your emotions, you're able to heal from your past and move forward into your future. These are the basic things that you need to do. And if you have these skills, what we call couple skills, you can literally overcome any issue in your marriage. There's nothing that can rock your marriage that you can't bounce back from and overcover if you have these particular skill sets in place.